All right, hello there. Welcome to my channel. I'm going to be discussing the works of Cormac McCarthy, mainly centering on Blood Meridian, which I just read. This is going to be, I apologize up front. I have no idea how I'm going to tackle this stack of cards that I have here. There's simply too much information, and I don't know that I'm going to get through all of it. I'm going to try to keep this video an hour in length. So, yeah, just giving you a warning up front. This is going to be a long one. This is not going to be a book review. This is going to be kind of a literary analysis, an esoteric analysis of the text, focusing on the cosmology of Cormac McCarthy's, universe, I guess, what you would say. They're all related. If you read, we're going to be comparing these kind of. The Road, No Country for Old Men, and Blood Meridian, the cosmology, the nature of the universe that he sets up is the same. And I would argue that it's gnostic. Now, I'm not alone in this. In fact, I came across this interview by an Australian literary scholar. Her name is Petra Mundik. So I want to give credit where credit's due, because she explained some things that I was like, whoa, I didn't catch that. So there's a few things in here from her that I'll be talking about, but I have not read her book. She wrote a book which was called A Bloody and Barbarous God, The Metaphysics of Cormac McCarthy. Again, that's Petra Mundik, Australian literary scholar, who produced several papers, although I only listened to an interview that she did, and honestly, I don't know the name of the program that I saw it on, so I'll try to link that below in the description box if you want to listen to that, but I'm going to go a lot farther than she did, because I'm going to be touching on literary influences, specifically Moby-Dick. This is a big one. So this is going to be a little bit eclectic. Okay, and I don't know how we're going to get through this. I'm intimidated. So strap in, folks. It's going to be a long one. There will be spoilers on all this, so be warned up front if you have not read The Road, No Country for Old Men, Blood Meridian, and you don't want them spoiled, then you probably want to dip out, come back after you've read them, and here we go. All right. Now let's talk about Cormac McCarthy. This is from the New York Times. In a rare 1992 interview, Cormac McCarthy defended the idea of ripping off other works by stating, quote, "The ugly fact is books are made out of other books. The novel depends for its life on the novels that have been written," unquote. For construction of Blood Meridian, talk about literary influences. Cormac McCarthy borrowed from the diaries and historical sources of Samuel Chamberlain's My Confession and other literary works. Most notably, for Blood Meridian, he borrowed from Moby-Dick. Okay? Now, the plot of Blood Meridian, really pretty simple. You have the Glanton Gang, which was a real-life gang of scalpers that operated in the Southwest and down into Mexico just after the Mexican-American War. Okay, so you're talking like, what, 1849, early 1850s-ish. That's the time frame we're dealing with, right? So that is the historical reality. So this book, at a surface level, you could read it as historical fiction. However, we're going to get deeper into it. We're going to get into the metaphysics. So talking about the book, Blood Meridian, I'm going to get into Moby-Dick. So we're going to get into Moby-Dick. We're going to end up kind of circling back to Blood Meridian. Okay, but I want to talk here about Moby-Dick, because I think in order to understand Cormac McCarthy, you have to read this book. It's all over. It's all over in the 3 books that I've read from him. Okay, Blood Meridian, No Country for Old Men, and The Road. There are references in there, all right, to Moby-Dick. In 1851, in a letter to friend and fellow writer Nathaniel Hawthorne, Herman Melville wrote of his magnum opus here, Moby-Dick, he said, quote, "I have written a wicked book and feel spotless as a lamb." And Moby-Dick is a wicked book, according to Herman Melville, and I would say the same. I believe that this is a wicked book as well. We'll get into why. But I want to talk about the works of Cormac McCarthy here and the kind of world that you see in them. It's kind of shared across the board. The world is hostile prison, okay? This is a Gnostic idea, and I think it's present in all of his works, and I think that it's coming straight from Moby-Dick as well. Melville and McCarthy share a similar cosmology. So the material realm you'll see in these works is a violent world where moral laws are essentially meaningless. Virtue does not protect the innocent. God is silent, or worse, God may actually be evil. So these texts they are wrestling with the nature of God, right? But the thing of it is in Blood Meridian, this hostile world that we see here, this violent realm. In chapter 16 of this book, there's a mention of, I'll read the text here. It talks about this old woman here on page 245. This is chapter 16. They sat in silence. The old woman in the court had commenced wailing some dolorous air, and the man was standing with his hand outheld. So that's a reference to the dolorous stroke, which comes from Arthurian literature. So essentially, the dolorous air would mean that they're living in the wasteland, because the dolorous stroke in Arthurian literature relates to the Fisher King and the wasteland. All right. So there's all kinds of these like little references that McCarthy makes to other things that you have to kind of like have read a lot of stuff to know the connections there. Here's another reference to things being hostile and violent, right? Like a hostile and violent world. So this is on page 48. I don't know which chapter this is. This is chapter 4. For those of you that are interested, it says, "The survivors lay quietly in that cratered void and watched the white-hot stars go rifling down the dark, or slept with their alien hearts beating in the sand like pilgrims exhausted upon the face of the planet Anoretta, clutched to a namelessness wheeling in the night." So Anoretta, the planet Anoretta, in Renaissance literature, known as the Destroyer Planet. It's a celestial body responsible for death, decay, and misfortune. In the case of Cormac McCarthy here, it would be the planet Earth itself is the planet Anoretta. There's a reference here, as I read it, that talks about their alien hearts, right? So this is a reference to they slept with their alien hearts beating in the sand. So alien hearts, talking about the fire, the symbolism of fire in Cormac McCarthy. This is all stuff that's going to tip you in that this is a Gnostic text. So like we're talking about Gnosticism, you'd believe that the body and soul are created by the demiurge, and that the spirit, right, the spark that's inside of you is created by the monad, the alien god. So maybe we should talk a bit about Gnostic cosmology before we go any further. Again, I just wanted to say that Petra Mundik, using her as a source, although literary critic Harold Bloom also recognized all of the Gnostic imagery within Blood Meridian, but he said, well, it's best to ignore it because it's reductionist at best. But Harold Bloom was a self-proclaimed Gnostic. He called himself an Emersonian Gnostic. So I think that if all this Gnosticism is baked into the text, how can you ignore it? Because I read this as a Gnostic allegory, right? That's the way I read it. In the epigraph to this book, right at the front, okay, you're going to have 3 epigraphs just prior to chapter number 1, which one of them right here is by Jacob Boehme. Now, Jacob Boehme, this quote, it says, quote, It is not to be thought that the life of darkness is sunk in misery and lost as if in sorrowing. There is no sorrowing. For sorrow is a thing that is swallowed up in death, and death and dying are the very life of the darkness. So Jacob Boehme, this is a quote from chapter 9 of Boehme's 6 Theosophical Points. So Boehme was a theosophist. He was a German philosopher and a mystic, and he taught dualism. Okay, so dualism, talking about equal and opposing forces of good and evil. So these systems that have this, for instance, would be like Zoroastrianism. Of course, Gnosticism has this. You don't find it in traditional Christianity. In traditional Christianity, the darkness itself, or evil, is a negation. It's the absence of the good. So they're like in traditional Christianity, there's not equal and opposing forces. Like God and the forces of darkness, like Satan and whatnot, are not on an equal playing field, because God is the supreme being. He's uncreated, and everything else, including the angels and the fallen angels, are created beings. So they are lesser than. So in dualism, you have like equal forces, right? Equal and opposing forces of dark and light. This Jacob Boehme also taught man was a microcosm of nature. This does have a, I guess there is like a Orthodox Christian understanding of this. If you read like St. Maximus the Confessor, right? Like he teaches that man is a microcosm of creation, but yeah, Jacob Boehme is definitely not coming from an Orthodox Christian perspective with his understanding, because he has this weird conception of the Trinity, where God the Father is fire, the Son is light, and the Spirit is the living principle of divine life. So, yeah, anyways, there's a quotation from him in the epigraph at the front. So that's kind of like one of the sources that Cormac McCarthy's drawing from, is this theosophy. So let's kind of get into a breakdown of Gnostic cosmology. Gnostic cosmology, in opposition to traditional Christianity, describes a radical dualistic universe, right? So opposing forces, equal and opposing forces of good and evil, where the spiritual realm of light is separated from the flawed material realm that we live in here, right, of darkness. So there was a Christian defense called Against Heresies, which was written by St. Irenaeus around 180 AD, where he goes through and does a breakdown of various Gnostic systems. So there is no one system of Gnosticism. There's tons of them. So it's kind of hard to pin down. It's kind of like trying to hammer Jello to the wall, but they do share commonalities. So if you were interested in reading that, again, it's St. Irenaeus of Lyons, Against Heresies, right? But Gnosticism originates sometime around the 2nd century. Anywho, Gnosticism rejects traditional Christian teaching on creation and the origin of the universe, meaning God spoke everything into existence. You see, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Be Genesis 1:1. And how was all the heavens and the earth created? Well, it was through the Logos, the Word. We read in the Gospel according to St. John. In the beginning, the Word was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God, and all things were made by him, and without him nothing was made which was made, right? And then it talks about the flesh coming, or God becoming flesh, the Word becoming flesh and coming to dwell amongst us in the incarnation of the Son of God, who then on the day of Pentecost sends the Holy Spirit into the world, which descends upon men as tongues of fire, mighty rushing wind. Well, that conception of God as the creator, the Son, and the Spirit, there is no conception of the Trinity within Gnosticism, right? Gnosticism teaches that there is this thing called the monad, which is the one true God, which is hidden, and that all of creation exists through emanation. So it's like instead of God creating things through speaking them into existence, let there be light, and there was light, they're all emanations. So everything is like a part of God because they descend from the monad, like rays from the sun, right? So they're all emanations of this one monastic deity. And the metaphysics of this, you have what's called the pleroma, which is the divine realm. The monad itself being the ultimate unknowable and transcendent true God, spirit of pure light. He's hidden. Can't interact with him, okay? So these emanations that come down, they're called aeons. They're divine beings that emanate from the monad, come down in like male and female pairs often, and they form the totality of the divine mind, including principles like truth, life, word, and wisdom. Well, that is the world of, like light, everything else, where the pleroma. There's a, contrary to the fall, as you see in the biblical narrative, text, where Adam and Eve eat from the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, thus transgressing the law of God, resulting in a fall, being like kind of a consequence. Like, for instance, God told them not to do that, so they do it. Death enters into the world, mortality, right? And basically the whole creation is corrupted as a consequence of transgression of the commandment. Much like if you touch a stove with your hand, you get burned. It's a consequence. You get a burn because somebody says, don't touch that stove. You touch it and you get burned. Well, don't eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. You do it. It's a consequence. The fall is a consequence as a result. Well, Gnosticism rejects that conception, that Christian conception. They say that this material universe that we live in, right here, wood, matter, whatever, this glass, right? It was all created by the demiurge, not the true God, not the monad. So what happened was that one of these emanations that come down from the monad, which is called Sophia, the aeon of wisdom, she emanated on her own, and it had disastrous consequences. It resulted in the creation of this creature, or not creature, but a fallen god known as the demiurge, sometimes called Yaldabaoth, but he's ignorant, sometimes called a blind god because he's unaware of the pleroma that exists above himself. The demiurge is also known as a craftsman, and he erroneously believes that he is the highest God. He's blind, like I said above. So he created the material realm that we live in order to trap the sparks, the spiritual sparks that exist within man. So like your spirit, right? Your spirit is an emanation from the monad, but it's trapped because your body and your soul recreated by the demiurge. And what he does is he tries to imprison all of humanity, the souls of, or the spirits of men within the material realm. Okay? To the Gnostics, the material world is a prison, right? And the archons, which are these rulers that are associated with the demiurge, they are associated with planetary spheres of astrological signs such as planets, stars, that type of thing. Well, they act as prison wardens. These archons act as prison wardens. They are led by the demiurge, and they maintain the illusion of time and space and matter to keep human souls asleep. So think of the Matrix, like with Neo, like the Agent Smith characters. The agents would be they'd function kind of like the archons, keeping everybody trapped in the illusory world. So, for instance, like Neo, Morpheus comes, and when Neo wakes up, he's like, my eyes hurt. And, Morpheus is because, he says, that's because you've never used them before. Welcome to the real world. So this material realm that we live in, according to the Gnostics, is like an illusory material prison. It's fake, right? So how do you achieve salvation and return to light? Well, it's not through sacraments like going to church and being baptized and partaking of the Lord's Supper or following, laws or divine commandments. It's through secret hidden knowledge known as gnosis, This is how a soul is liberated and ascend through the celestial spheres of the archons, which there's 7 levels in most Gnosticism. There's 7 realms that belong to the lower realms of the archons, and you have to get through the 7 and ascend into the 8 to reach the pleroma of light. All right? Another thing here is that the Garden of Eden, the serpent, is actually seen as a force of good because he leads humanity to partake of the hidden knowledge that's being guarded by the demiurge, because they see the Old Testament God and the New Testament God as distinct things. And the demiurge is often identified with Jehovah, the God of the Old Testament. Of course, this is erroneous. There's explanations and everything, included in Against Heresies. St. Irenaeus makes a defense of the unity of God in the Old and New Testament, but that goes beyond the purview of this discussion today. So I just wanted to get through these note cards real quick, and we will move on. So we will touch on Moby-Dick and the Gnosticism within this book, but we're not going to start there. We're going to begin with parallels between Moby-Dick and Blood Meridian. So for instance, the first line of Blood Meridian says, "See the child." The first line of Moby-Dick says, "Call me Ishmael." So 3-word opening lines. The POV character for the audience in Blood Meridian is the kid. The POV character, actually the narrator of Moby-Dick is Ishmael. This is first-person narration, although it does slip around. This is like third-person omniscient, so it is a little bit different. But we follow kind of like the cipher for the audience is the kid in Blood Meridian and Ishmael in Moby-Dick. Character kind of like disappears, and in both stories, the character is kind of like taken over. We kind of lose sight of Ishmael in Moby-Dick. We kind of lose sight of the kid in here. And in Moby-Dick, Ahab takes over, and in Blood Meridian, the focus becomes Judge Holden. So there's a lot of similarities there. Kind of see the relationship, the antagonism, kind of like you have in Moby-Dick. It's Ishmael, and the opposing character would be Ahab. And this, it's the kid and Judge Holden. Now, in Moby-Dick, this book portrays Ahab as a Promethean Gnostic hero, right? Like stealing fire from the gods, essentially. And Cormac McCarthy kind of like aping off of that in a way. I don't know who the hero would be of Blood Meridian. I guess it'd be the kid, although you kind of call him failed, wouldn't you? But there is the idea of Ahab as the Gnostic hero. In Moby-Dick, the demiurge is the white whale itself. And in Blood Meridian, the demiurge would be Judge Holden. This is the evil god that keeps men enslaved and trapped, so to speak, in the Matrix, right? So let's talk about Moby-Dick, Ahab as a Gnostic hero. We're going to talk about the nature of the universe in Moby-Dick, because I believe that Cormac McCarthy, again, is borrowing heavily from this, and it's present in his work. So we have the chapter, I believe this is chapter 36, it's called The Quarter Deck, where Ahab is talking about going after the white whale. "I am game for his crooked jaw and for the jaws of death, to Captain Ahab." He's speaking to the crew. We'll skip past all this about him chasing, Moby-Dick around perdition's flames and everything else to get to the nature of the universe as Ahab sees it. So Ahab gives his big speech about vengeance upon Moby-Dick, who took his leg and everything else. And "Vengeance on a dumb brute," cried Starbuck, "that simply smote thee from blindest instinct. Madness! To be enraged with a dumb thing, Captain Ahab, seems blasphemous. Hark ye yet again the little lower layer. All visible objects, man, are but as pasteboard masks. But in each event, in the living act, The undoubted deed there some unknown but still reasoning thing puts forth the moldings of its features from behind the unreasoning mask. If man will strike, strike through the mask. How can the prisoner reach outside except by thrusting through the wall? To me, the white whale is that wall, shoved near to me. So there you go. So what's he talking about? He's talking about the pasteboard mask. All of reality, the material realm that we live in, is a pasteboard mask. That there's a reality behind it, and that Moby-Dick represents to him like the symbol of it. The white whale is the wall. The white whale functions as the demiurge. Okay? The gnostic nature of the universe, Moby-Dick. Now, Moby-Dick, the white whale, well, guess what? What color is Judge Holden, everybody? He's described as being 7 foot tall. He's pale white, right? He's bald. I mean, guy's got no hair. Doesn't he remind you in appearance of the white whale? So he's functioning as the demiurge in Blood Meridian. It's the same thing. Judge Holden is the white whale, right? There is also in here a meditation in chapter 42 of Moby-Dick on the color of white, whiteness itself. So in this chapter, chapter 42, the whiteness of the whale, he goes through like a whole, I guess like spiritual analysis, or I don't know, on the color of white. Talks about the white elephants. He talks about polar bears. He just talks about like the color of white in fire all over the place. And there is an interesting thing. He talks about white of the albatross. Talks about Samuel Taylor Coleridge's epic poem, right? The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. But there's an interesting thing here about the albino man. Okay, what is Judge Holden? Judge Holden's white, right? What is it in the albino man so peculiar? What is it in the albino man so peculiarly repels and often shocks the eye, as it sometimes he is loathed by his own kith and kin? It is that whiteness which invests him, a thing expressed by the name he bears. The albino is as well made as other men. He has no substantive deformity, and yet this mere aspect of all-pervading whiteness makes him more strangely hideous than the ugliest abortion. Why should this be so? So yeah, interesting. He talks about the albino and the color of white. So I mean, like, that's the judge. That's the judge. The judge appearing as a big white, often described as baby. Very bizarre. Another similarity between Judge Holden and the white whale Moby-Dick is there's a passage in this book where the ex-priest, right? What was his name? Toby? So this is Tobin speaking to the kid. Tobin says, every man in the company claims to have encountered that sooth-souled rascal in some other place. Okay, talking about the judge, right? Because the kid says that he met the judge in Nacogdoches a long time ago before he met him here. And Tobin says everybody in the company, you know, the Glanton gang says that the same thing. They all met him before. Well, the same thing can be said of Moby-Dick in, you know, this story. The white whale itself is often seen like bilocating. The whale is seen like hundreds of miles apart at the same time, which is an impossibility, giving the white whale a supernatural component, much like Judge Holden here, who, when they meet him, he's just sitting on a rock in the middle of nowhere, like he's always been there, right? It's just very weird. Also, the judge himself, just like Moby-Dick, Moby-Dick is full of harpoons. He has like super strength. He's like almost like an immortal, impenetrable beast of pure chaos and destruction. Judge Holden has super strength. There's a part in the book where he lifts a meteorite, an anvil, right, over his head, which is an impossibility. There's a scene where Judge Holden takes a coin and he throws it into the darkness while he's discussing the nature of the universe, and the coin comes back to him out of the darkness as if it's almost like tethered to him somehow. It violates the laws of physics, okay? All right, so we've talked about the judge as the whale, being the demiurge. Also, there's a line in Melville, like Ahab quotes Milton, right? The Satan, the Lucifer. Better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven. So Ahab quotes that line. Well, there is a quote from Milton, or a Miltonian scene that takes place in uh, Blood Meridian, where the judge makes gunpowder by having them urinate into the ground there. I guess I didn't look the reference up myself, but people say that that's a reference to Milton. So there's references to Milton both in Melville and Blood Meridian. We'll move on from there. Are there any other characters or similarities between this book, Moby-Dick, and Blood Meridian? Yes, the character of Pip. All right, and later on in the book, the character of the idiot, like that they find in the cage, that becomes kind of like the pet of the judge. Pip in Moby Dick becomes kind of like an idiot character after he has an experience where he falls into the sea, falls out of the whaling boat, gets lost in the ocean, and he sees God. He has a vision of God like weaving on a loom, and God is indifferent to the plight of his creation. Maybe I'll read that passage for you because I think we're talking about the hostile universe of Cormac McCarthy. I think he and Milton share a lot of similarities there. So the little boy Pip, he falls into the ocean. He's in the sea, and he doesn't drown really, but he gets carried down alive into the depths. So here it is. Let's see. The sea had generally kept his finite body up, but drowned the infinite of his soul. Not drowned entirely, though, rather carried down alive to wondrous depths, where strange shapes of the unwarped primal world glided to and fro before his passive eyes, and the miser merman, Wisdom, revealed his hoarded heaps. Now, wisdom's capitalized here, so you think that's referring to Sophia, the god, the aeon of wisdom. Wisdom revealed his hoarded heaps, and among the joyous, heartless, ever juvenile eternities, Pip saw the multitudinous God omnipresent, coral insects that out of the firmament of waters heaved the colossal orbs. He saw God's foot upon the treadle of the loom and spoke it, and therefore his shipmates called him mad. So man's insanity is heaven's sense, and wandering from all mortal reason, man comes at last to that celestial thought, which to reason is absurd and frantic, and weal or woe, feels the uncompromised, indifferent as his God. So Pip sees this vision of God who's weaving on a loom, like a weaver. You might even think of the Wheel of Time with Robert Jordan weaving out the loom, but God is indifferent to the plight or the goings on of his creation. He's completely indifferent to it, right? So, I mean, you can kind of see that in like Anton Chigurh in No Country for Old Men, like when he gets shot and stuff. He's just completely indifferent to his own injuries. He's just, played by Javier Bardem. I wouldn't say he's a demiurge character, but he's definitely kind of like a force of nature, in kind of the same way as like maybe one of the archons or something. So chapter 14 here is probably the best example of the judge as the demiurge. This is the chapter that this takes place in, where the judge is having a conversation where he says, whatever exists, he said, whatever in creation exists without my knowledge exists without my consent. He looked about the dark forest in which they were bivouacked. He nodded towards the specimens he collected. These anonymous creatures, he said, may seem little or nothing in the world, yet the smallest crumb can devour us. See the violent nature of the universe, right? Any smallest thing beneath yon rock out of men's knowing. Only nature can enslave man. Only nature can enslave man. Think about the demiurge trapping people within the material realm. They're sparks. He says here, that and only when the existence of each last entity is routed out and made to stand naked before him will he be properly suzerain of the earth. What's a suzerain? A keeper or overlord. Why not say keeper then? Because he's a special kind of keeper. A suzerain rules even where there are other rulers. His authority countermands local judgments. So yeah, this is his conversation with Toadvine. So just think about the demiurge and the archons and all that talked about here, right? Again, I have not read the book written by Mundik, right? By Professor Mundik, but I did listen to the interview, and this was brought up. There's a passage where the judge is spouting off Nietzsche. Okay, this is in chapter, let's see here, chapter 17. Brown studied the judge. You're crazy, Holden, crazy at last. The judge smiled. Might does not make right, said Irving. The man that wins in some combat is not vindicated morally. Moral law is an invention of mankind for the disenfranchisement of the powerful in favor of the weak. Historical law subverts it at every turn. A moral view can never be proven right or wrong by any ultimate test. A man falling dead in a duel is not thought thereby to be proven in error as to his views. So yeah, this sounds just like something out of Nietzsche, right? Very Nietzschean. If you've read any Nietzsche. Although, what was Nietzsche's most famous work? Thus Spoke Zarathustra. What was Zarathustra? Well, he's a prophet of Zoroastrianism, a dualistic system, right? So it's not Gnostic because Zoroastrianism views the created material realm as a good thing. It's good, but it does have that dualistic, equal and opposing forces of good and evil that you find in Gnosticism. So towards the end of the book, the kid has a dream about the judge. This is one that I picked up on that I didn't hear anybody talk about, and I thought, oh, this is interesting. So the judge, let's see, the kid. So this almost reminds me of Pip's vision of the God, like treating out the, was it weaving on the loom, the sea. Here we see the judge in this dream. I'm trying to see what page it is. See, because I'm quoting page numbers to you, but your version could be different. So this is chapter 22. All right. In his delirium, he ransacked the linens of his pallet for arms, but there were none. The judge smiled. The fool was no longer there, but another man. And this other man he could never see in his entirety. But he seemed an artisan and a worker in metal. The judge enshadowed him, where he crouched at his trade, but he was a cold forger who worked with hammer and die, perhaps under some indictment and an exile from men's fires, hammering out his own conjectural destiny all through the night of his becoming some coinage for a dawn that would not be. It is this false moneyer with his gravers and burns who seeks favor with the judge, and he is at contriving from cold slag brute and the crucible a face that will pass, an image that will render his residential specie current in the markets where men barter. Of this is the judge, and the night does not end. So it's talking about forging like false coinage or false currency, and kind of reminded me, because it's a dream, it's a vision of a man working on a forge and forging out in metals, but the judge enshadow's him, right? The imagery that popped into my mind was from Faust, okay, where in the second part of Faust, Faust Part 2, Mephistopheles comes up with this plan to make counterfeit money. This is talking about false currency here, and the judge is kind of like behind it. So Wolfgang von Goethe, right, also kind of has a connection to that guy I mentioned to you way at the beginning. All my note cards are out of order, but the epigraph. So yeah, this epigraph that was at the beginning here by Jacob Boehme. was evidently Goethe read Bohm as well. So there's a Goethe connection, okay? So we'll talk about kind of like the fatalism of this universe. You see celestial symbols all throughout Blood Meridian with there's stars present at the birth of the kid. Again, full spoilers, there's stars present at the death of the kid at the end of the book. And then there's numerology within this book. So the number 8 reoccurs over and over again. This is something that Professor Mundik talked about in her interview, and I'm sure she talks about it in her book. Again, scholar Petra Mundik. She says that the chapter 15, you see the number 8 recurring over and over throughout Blood Meridian. And it's there's a reason for that. Chapter 15 of Blood Meridian, there are these little, I don't know what you would call these, kind of like headers that have like chapter summaries above, okay, at the top of each of the chapters. See them here? Kind of like summarize it out, but here you see the word, the Ogdoad, right? That is a Gnostic term. That is a term for the 8th. There's 7 realms of the archons, and then the 8th is the Ogdoad. You get into the pleroma. So you see this 8 occurring over and over again. So for instance, there's a part where there's, in this chapter, there's 8 severed heads, like on the ground, and actually the judge comes over and kicks one of them over. Okay, reducing the number to 7, which I don't know if that symbolically means that he's reducing the 8 to the 7 because that's the number of the archonic realm where you're trapped in the material. So whatever, he reduces the 8 to 7. Make it that way you will. There's also the number 8 when they come across, of course, the famous baby tree. You've read this, you know what I'm talking about. But there's 8 babies on the baby tree. So the number 8, pay attention to that. It occurs over and over again. Numerology within Blood Meridian. Of course, tarot cards. Okay, talked about astrology and tarot cards. I don't know what all the astrological symbols mean, right? I just know they're there. It talks about Orion and stuff. You see like meteors and all kinds of things. But the kid at one point, they're drawing cards, and he draws the 4 of Cups, the tarot card. If you look this up, it's the card representing apathy, introspection, and emotional withdrawal. So that's the card that he draws, and I think that we as the audience, kind of like, since we're viewing this through the kid in a way, we become apathetic and introspective as we're reading this, because you get worn down by the sheer bloodbath of the violence that you just become apathetic to it after a while. So in a way, I think that we're all drawing the 4 of Cups, like, reading this book. At least, I don't know if it's just me. Did you become like apathetic reading this, where it just becomes like drudgery, where it's just the same thing over and over again? You're just like, okay, I'm kind of just over the story. Are we going to do anything with this? That's apathy for you as the reader, because it's just like rinse and repeat. Death, destruction, whorehouse, death, destruction, whorehouse, church, destroyed church. It's like over and over. It's repetitive. It kind of wears you down. Make another Moby-Dick connection. So in Moby-Dick, in chapter 19, okay, there's a chapter called The Prophet. And Ishmael meets this guy named Elijah in that chapter, who essentially prophesies, okay? So this Elijah is kind of cryptic. He talks to him. He asks, Ishmael and Queequeg, they say, "Yes," said I, this is Ishmael, "we have just signed the articles." And this is Elijah speaking. He says, "Anything down there about your souls?" "About what?" "Oh, perhaps you haven't got any," he said quickly. "No matter, though. I know many chaps that haven't got any. Good luck to 'em. And they are all the better off for it. A soul's a sort of a fifth wheel to a wagon." This whole conversation is kind of interesting. It's kind of cryptic. he says later on down here about their names on the paper. Ye shipped, have ye names down on the paper? Well, well, what's signed is signed, and what's to be will be. Then again, perhaps it won't be, after all. Anyhow, it's all fixed and arranged already, and some sailor or others must go with them, I suppose, as well as these any other men. God pity 'em. Morning to ye, shipmates, morning. The ineffable heavens bless ye. I'm sorry I stopped ye. So this character here, there's a character named the Mennonite. Doesn't really have a name. Appears in chapter 3 of Blood Meridian, and he very much kind of a straight parallel to Elijah. And in fact, there's another Elijah character. So this Moby-Dick stuff pops up in the Road. Okay, so jump over to the Road real quick, right? So as the man and the boy are walking across the earth in this burned out apocalyptic wasteland, which to me is just another allegory representing the gnostic cosmology of the realm of the demiurge, they come across this man named Eli. There's a traveler on the road. This is like on page 161 in this edition, was where they first meet him. And then he's walking along. I'll try to find the conversation because this is a famous conversation where they give him something to eat. So this blind man, who's nearly blind, says that his name is Eli, right? He says, what's your name? Eli. Eli what? What's wrong with Eli? Nothing. Let's go. So that's his name. He's the only named character in the entire book, by the way. The next page here, the man says to Eli, how long have you been on the road? I was always on the road. You can't stay in one place. How do you live? I just keep going. I knew this was coming. You knew it was coming. Yeah, this is something like it. I always believed in it. Did you try to get ready for it? No. What would you do? I don't know. People were always getting ready for tomorrow. I didn't believe in that. Tomorrow wasn't getting ready for them. It didn't even know they were there. I guess not. So this character is played by Robert Duvall in the movie, and they changed all the dialogue because in the movie they add that the character has a son that died, which is not in the book. The movie really screwed this up. Okay, and then this man says here, he says this line, there is no God, and we are his prophets. What he says, so nihilism. He says, I don't understand how, this is the man now speaking to Eli. I don't understand how you're still alive. How do you eat? I don't know. You don't know? People give you things. People give you things. Yes. To eat? To eat? Yes. No, they don't. You did. No, I didn't. The boy did. So you see this, like, he's always been on the road. That's what he says. How can he eat? This man is a supernatural character. In my opinion, this is the demiurge. Okay? This is the demiurge. This is the Judge Holden character. This is Moby-Dick. They are meeting the demiurge. I'm going to stand by that because on the next page he says to him, is your name really Eli? He says, no. You don't want to say your name? I don't want to say it. Why? I couldn't trust you with it, to do something with it. I don't want anybody talking about me to say where I was or what I said when I was there. I mean, you could talk about me maybe, but nobody could say that it was me. I could be anybody. Come on, man. Right? He could be the white whale, couldn't he? He could be Judge Holden. He also says here that he wants everybody dead, right? Later on. He's talking about maybe the child, the boy here is God. When I saw that boy, I thought that I had died. You thought he was an angel? I didn't know what he was. I never thought to see a child again. I didn't know what would happen. What if I said he's a god? The old man shook his head. I'm past all that now, have been for years. Where men can't live, gods fare no better. You'll see. It's better to be alone. So is this guy talking about the child being a god, or is he talking about like he himself is the demiurge, the blind god? Because again, he can't see, he's blind, right? And then he said that there is no God and we are his prophets, which the whole point of the demiurge is to keep men enslaved and trapped. But he's praying for the destruction of everyone. He says, to be on the road with the last God would be a terrible thing, so I hope it's not true. Things will get better when everybody's gone. They will? Sure they will. Better for who? Everybody. Everybody? Sure, we're all better off. We'll all breathe easier. That's good to know. Yes, it is. When we're all gone at last, there'll be nobody here but death, and his days will be numbered too. He'll be out on the road there with nothing to do and nobody to do it to. He'll say, where'd everybody go? And that's how it will be. What's wrong with that? This is just as evil as anything, Judge Holden says. This is not a good character. I believe he's the demiurge. But anyways, the point being that this prophet is named Elijah, or Eli. It doesn't say Elijah, but Elijah is the name of the prophet in Moby-Dick. So these things pop up over and over again. There's tons of biblical imagery loaded into McCarthy's books. In Blood Meridian, you see there's a whirlwind. There's a quote. This is on page 117 in this edition. It says, out of that whirlwind, no voice spoke. So they see like tornadoes or dust devils out there. This is an allusion to Job 38, where God speaks to Job from the whirlwind. So theodicy, Job wrestling with the problem of evil, and God speaks to him. But there's no voice speaking here from the whirlwind in Blood Meridian because God is silent. There's also an allusion to a burning tree, which this is on page 224 and 225 of this edition, which kind of reminds you of Moses when God speaks to him from the burning bush. Again, no voice speaks because there's no voice of God other than the evil God in Cormac McCarthy. There's overt satanic imagery. This is almost like Luciferian, okay? Every time you see a church in Blood Meridian, it's ruined. There's ruined churches all throughout. This book's loaded with iconoclasm. So this book is like, in my opinion, it's satanic. All right, so here, page 27. He woke in the nave of a ruinous church, blinking up at the vaulted ceiling and the tall swaging walls with their faded frescoes. The floor of the church was deep in dried guano, the droppings of cattle and sheep. Pigeons flapped through the piers of dusty light, and 3 buzzards hobbled about on the picked bone carcass of some dead animal in the chancel. You see this all the time. Next page, satanic iconoclasm. They see inside of this church the huge carved and paneled doors hung wop on their hinges, and a carved stone virgin held in her arms a headless child. So here we see the Theotokos, the Virgin Mary, holding a headless Christ. The child's head is missing. Another ruined church on page 63. Every church in this book is all desolate and destroyed. When he returned to the square, Sproul was gone. All about lay in shadow. He crossed the square and mounted the stone steps to the door of the church and entered. Sproul was standing in the vestibule. Long buttresses of light fell from the high windows in the western wall. There were no pews in the church, and the stone floor was heaped with scalped and naked and partly eaten bodies of some 40 souls who'd barricaded themselves in the house of God against the heathen. Again, in this universe, God can't save you. There is no escape for the righteous. Virtue doesn't save you in Cormac McCarthy's universe. The savages had hacked holes in the roof and shot them down from above, and the floor was littered with arrow shafts where they'd snapped them off to get the clothes from the bodies. The altars had been hauled down and the tabernacle looted. So the tabernacle where you keep the reserved sacrament, right? The body of Christ has been looted. Tabernacle's destroyed. The tabernacle looted, and the great sleeping god of the Mexicans routed from his golden cup. The primitive painted saints in their frames hung cocked on the walls as if an earthquake had visited, and a dead Christ and a glass bear lay broken in the chancel floor. Yeah, isn't that great? So Christ is a dead Christ, and he's broken. So every time you see Christ imagery in here, there's another passage where it says that Christ is disemboweled. So he's beheaded, he's broken, the tabernacles are all destroyed. So this is very like antichrist. This is antagonistic to Christians. I don't know how people can read Cormac McCarthy and think that this is Christian imagery, because it's not. It's Luciferian Gnosticism. Priests and vultures are described like being the exact same descriptions. Okay, you're living in a fatalistic universe here. I suppose you could get back and talk about Anton Chigurh momentarily in No Country for Old Men about kind of like an agent of the, I don't know. He says at one point in here when he meets Carla, again, spoilers, Carla Jean Moss at the end, after Llewellyn is dead, he promised Llewellyn that he was going to kill Carla Jean. And so even though Llewellyn's dead, he comes to kill her because it's like fate. Like he has to. He's bound by the laws of this fatalistic, mechanized universe. So here's the conversation between Anton Chigurh, played by Javier Bardem, in No Country for Old Men. She looked at the bedside table. It's not there, he said. She sat slumped forward, holding her hat in her arms. You've got no cause to hurt me, she said. I know, but I gave my word. Your word. Yes, we're at the mercy of the dead here. In this case, your husband. That don't make no sense. I'm afraid it does. I don't have no money. You know I ain't got it. I know. You give your word to my husband to kill me? Yes. He's dead. My husband is dead. Yes, but I'm not. You don't owe me. You don't owe nothing to dead people. Chigurh cocked his head slightly. No, he said. How can you? How can you not? They're dead. Yes, but my word is not dead. Nothing can change that. You can change it. I don't think so. Even a non-believer might find it useful to model himself after God. Very useful, in fact. You're just a blasphemer. So, yeah, you're going to go on here and talk about a loss of faith and everything else, but definitely he said model yourself after God. Well, which God is he modeling himself after? I would say he's modeling himself after the demiurge, right? the demiurge, okay? In other words, he's not a supernatural character, Chigurh, but he patterns himself after the demiurge. So he's essentially like, you got your beer and you got your light beer. Judge holding his beer, and Chigurh is holding light. Okay, so we've almost reached an hour. I'm going to wrap this up, and I'm sorry this was as messy as it was, but I want to talk about fire. I want to close this out and connect it back to Moby-Dick. We're going to talk about fire, the symbology of fire, and Blood Meridian, No Country for Old Men, The Road, and Moby-Dick, because I think that this is where he got it from. I think Cormac McCarthy got the fire from Moby-Dick. So we'll read through some of these passages here. Talk about Blood Meridian, the book we're currently talking about. We'll talk about what this epilogue means at the very end. We'll read through it. Okay? So you have after the novel's concluded, the end, the next page, you have this weird epilogue that says, in the dawn there was a man progressing over the plain by means of holes which he is making in the ground. He uses an implement with two handles, and he chucks it into the hole, and he enkindles the stone in the hole with his steel hole by the hole striking the fire out of the rock which God has put there. On the plain behind him are the wanderers in search of bones, and those who do not search, and they move haltingly in the light like mechanisms whose movements are monitored with this escapement and palate, so that they appear restrained by a prudence of reflectiveness which has no inner reality. They cross in their progress one by one that track of holes that runs to the rim of the visible ground, and which seems less the pursuit of some continuance than the verification of a principle, a validation of sequence and causality, as if each round and perfect hole owed its existence to the one before it there on that prairie, upon which are the bones and the gatherers of bones and those who do not gather. He strikes fire in the hole and draws out his steel. Then they all move on again. So there you got fire, striking fire, okay, out of the rock, okay. Fire, No Country for Old Men. This is at the very end. This speech is given by Tommy Lee Jones, almost verbatim from the book at the end of the film adaptation. This is a great film adaptation, even though I'm not a fan of the novel. He nails it. So Sheriff Bell is talking about two dreams that he had after his daddy died. And he says this, quote, I had two dreams about him after he died. I don't remember the first one all that well, but it's about meeting him in a town somewheres, and he gave me some money, and I think I lost it. But the second one, it was like it was both back in older times, and I was on horseback going through the mountains of a night, going through this pass in the mountains. It was cold and there was snow on the ground, and he rode past me and kept on going. Never said nothing. He just rode on past, and he had this blanket wrapped around him. He had his head down, and when he rode past, I seen he was carrying fire and a horn, the way people used to do it, and I could see that horn from the light inside of it, about the color of the moon. In the dream, I knew that he was going on ahead and that he was fixing to make a fire somewhere out there in all that dark and all that cold. And I knew that whenever I got there, he'd be there. And then I woke up. So fire, right? You get this recurring motif. And guess what? It's all about carrying the fire in the road. So the man is always telling the boy that they're, carry the fire. So here's the man saying to the boy at the end, here's the boy. I want to be with you. You can't. Please, you can't. You have to carry the fire. I don't know how to. Yes, you do. Is it real? The fire? Yes, it is. Where is it? I don't know where it is. Yes, you do. It's inside you. It was always there. I can see it. Fire. Fire. So what is this? Is this like Prometheus stealing fire from the gods? Is this the Luciferian torch of enlightenment? Is this the fire of Heraclitus, right? Like all the universe is constructed of fire? So returning back to Australian literary scholar Petra Mundik, she argues that the fire represents the divine spark, the pneuma, a fragment of the true transcendent God, the monad, in the Gnostic system, which has been trapped within the dark, materially corrupt cosmos by the demiurge. Since the world is hostile to spiritual awakening, the divine spark must be, quote, struck out of the rock by enduring hardship, endurance, suffering, and resistance to the demiurge. Now, do we see this symbology in Moby-Dick, which is where I think old Cormac McCarthy's pulling this from? Yes, we do. In chapter 119, which is called The Candles, where Captain Ahab gives his defiant Promethean speech. Okay? So here in chapter 119, this is towards the end of the book, and this is going to seal the doom of the crew of the Pequod, where the mastheads have been illuminated by St. Elmo's fire, which here they're called the corpuscents. And all of the crew sees it, and they view it, even though it's a sign that can be explained through nature, they view it as an omen. Okay? The mastheads are illumined, and Ahab looks up. Aye, aye, men, cried Ahab. Look up at it, mark it well. The white flame but lights the way to the white whale. Hand me those mainmast links there. I would fain feel this pulse, and let mine beat against it, blood against fire, so. Then turning the last link held fast in his left hand, he put his foot upon the Parsi. Now the Parsi is his Zoroastrian prophet. It's also known as Fedula. Sometimes he's called the Persian. Okay, so this is a guy that travels with Ahab. So he puts his foot upon the Parsi, and with fixed upward eye and high-flung right arm, he stood erect before the lofty tri-pointed trinity of flames. O thou clear spirit of clear fire, whom on these seas I, as Persian, once did worship, till in the sacramental act so burned by thee, that to this hour I bear the scar. So he was a Zoroastrian. He's telling you right here. He believed that the world was good because that's what Zoroastrian teaches it. It's a dualistic system, but the material realm is good. And he says, hey, that was before I got struck by lightning. So he got struck by fire. He says, he bears the scar. I now know thee, thou clear spirit, and I know that thy right worship is defiance. To neither love nor reverence wilt thou be kind, and in for hate thou canst but kill and are killed. No fearless fool now fronts thee. I own thy speechless, placeless power, but to the last gasp of my earthquake life will dispute its unconditional, unintegral mastery in me. In the midst of the personified impersonal, a personality stands here. Though but appointed best, whensoever I came, whensoever I go. Yet while I earthly live, the queenly personality lives in me and feels her royal rights. But war is pain. War is pain. Anybody, Judge Holden, anybody? And hate is woe. Come in thy lowest form of love, and I will kneel and kiss thee. But at thy highest come as mere supernal power. And though thou launchest navies of full freighted worlds, there's that in here that still remains indifferent. O thou clear spirit of thy fire, thou madest me, and like a true child of fire, I breathe it back to thee. So yeah. Fire, anybody? Yeah, it's definitely gnostic fire. It's the divine spark. So sorry to drag this out for over an hour. If you stuck through this far, let me know what you're thinking below. Again, I'll try to link the interview from Petra Mundik below, even though I'm not a Gnostic. I'm a Christian, and I totally am opposed to this demonic Luciferian garbage, but I will link it below. Again, the name of her book is titled A Bloody and Barbarous God, The Metaphysics of Cormac McCarthy by Petra Mundik. Thank you for watching. Have a wonderful day.